On January 7th, 1980, the COMEX Board of Governors implemented something called Silver Rule 7. It banned new long positions in silver futures and raised margin requirements by over 300%. Exactly 46 years later, on January 7th, 2026, the CME did something eerily similar. They raised silver margins by 47% in a single day. And what I'm about to show you in the next 14 minutes is a timeline that proves this isn't coincidence. This is the exact same playbook. I know you're exhausted. You've watched silver go from $121 to $75 in 6 hours. You've seen your portfolio destroyed, your Reddit threads filled with panic, and every mainstream outlet telling you the bubble popped. But here's what nobody's connecting. In 1980, they used margin hikes to crush the Hunt brothers and collapse silver from $50 to $10. In 2026, they're using the exact same weapon. And this time, the target isn't 2 Texas billionaires, it's you. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the complete timeline. First, I'll show you the 5 margin hikes in 7 weeks. The dates, the percentages, the coordinated timing. Then, I'll expose the 1980 playbook, how Silver Rule 7 worked, why it crashed the market, and how 2026 is a copy-paste. Third, I'll reveal the Shanghai connection, how CME and Shanghai moved together on the same days. Finally, I'll show you the math. COMEX inventories are down 22%. Physical premiums are spiking, and this margin trap might backfire spectacularly. Let's start with the timeline. On December 12th, 2025, the CME raised silver margins for the first time. Silver was trading around $35 per ounce, and the margin went from roughly 7% to 9%. That's a 28% increase in collateral required to hold a futures position. At the time, most traders ignored it. Markets were calm, volatility was low, it seemed routine. Then, on December 29th, 2025, 17 days later, the CME raised margins again. This time, silver had rallied to $42 and margins went from 9% to 11%. That's another 22% increase. 2 hikes in 2 weeks. Bloomberg reported it as a second time in a week, but most people were on holiday vacation. The market barely reacted, but professional traders started to notice a pattern. On December 31st, 2025, just 2 days later, the CME announced a third hike, effective after the close. Silver had hit $48 and margins jumped from 11% to 13%. That's a cumulative increase of over 85% in 3 weeks. This was no longer routine. This was the exchange telling the market, we're going to squeeze leverage out of this rally. And if you can't post more cash, you're getting margin called. Then on January 7th, 2026, exactly 1 week later, the CME dropped the hammer. Silver had exploded to $68 and margins were raised from 13% to a staggering 19%. That's a 47% single-day increase. LinkedIn posts called it a brutal knockout punch. Traders who bought silver at $35 with 7% margin now needed to post 19%, nearly triple the collateral. If they couldn't, their positions were liquidated automatically. But here's where it gets insane. On January 30th, 2026, 3 weeks after the January 7th hike, silver had surged to $121, and the CME announced the 5th margin hike. This time, they raised maintenance margins to 15% for speculative traders, but for high-risk accounts, they went to 19%, 21%. That's an 80% cumulative increase from December 12th to January 30th. And that same day, silver crashed 40% in 6 hours, wiping out $10 trillion in global wealth. Coincidence or execution? Let me say that again. The CME raised margins 5 times in 7 weeks. Each hike came as silver was rallying. The 5th hike was announced on the same day as the crash. And that crash happened to be the worst single-day silver collapse since March 27th, 1980, when the Hunt brothers were liquidated after Silver Rule 7. Now, let's talk about 1980. On January 7th, 1980, COMEX implemented Silver Rule 7. It restricted the purchase of new long futures contracts and raised margin requirements from fixed dollar amounts to percentage-based rates. The rule was designed to curb excessive speculation, but in reality, it was designed to destroy the Hunt brothers' silver position. Nelson and William Hunt had accumulated 195 million ounces of physical silver and controlled massive futures positions. They were leveraged heavily, using margin debt to finance the strategy. When Silver Rule 7 hit, their credit evaporated. Banks refused to lend against silver positions. Margin calls came in waves, $100 million, $300 million eventually, $1.7 billion. The Hunts couldn't meet the calls. On March 27th, 1980, Silver Thursday, they defaulted. Silver crashed from $50 to $10. The market collapsed. And the exchange claimed they were protecting market integrity. Fast forward to 2026. On January 7th, 2026, exactly 46 years to the day, the CME raised silver margins by 47%. On January 30th, 2026, the same time of year as Silver Thursday, silver crashed 40%. The exchange claimed they were ensuring adequate collateral coverage due to extreme volatility. But the result was the same. Leveraged longs were liquidated, billions were wiped out, and the paper price collapsed. Here's the difference. In 1980, the Hunt brothers were the only major players. In 2026, millions of retail traders, hedge funds, and industrial buyers are long silver. In 1980, the crash scared people away for decades. In 2026, physical premiums spiked immediately because people know the crash was artificial. Now, let's talk about Shanghai. On February 3rd, 2026, 4 days after the crash, the Shanghai Gold Exchange announced it was lowering silver margins from 26% to 23%. That's the opposite of what the CME did. While CME was raising margins to crush longs, Shanghai was lowering them to encourage buyers. Why? Because Shanghai wants physical delivery. CME wants to keep silver on paper. But here's the coordination. On January 30th, the day of the crash, COMEX reported that 531 tons of paper silver were traded in Shanghai with zero physical movement. That's 17 million ounces traded, but none delivered. It was pure paper liquidation, synchronized with the CME margin call. The exchanges didn't announce a joint plan, but the data shows perfect timing. CME raises margins, longs get margin called, Shanghai provides the paper liquidity to absorb the selling, and the price collapses. Let me repeat that. On the same day CME triggered the fifth margin hike, Shanghai traded 531 tons of paper silver with zero physical delivery. That's coordination. And the result? Paper price crashed to $75, but physical premiums spiked to $15, $30 over spot. The two markets decoupled. Now, here's why this matters. COMEX silver inventories have fallen 22% since September 2025. As of February 2nd, 2026, registered silver inventories, the metal available for delivery, are down to approximately 410 million ounces, a multi-year low. In the first week of January alone, 33.45 million ounces were withdrawn. That's 26% of deliverable inventory in 7 days. Inventory is draining while CME is raising margins to discourage buyers. That's the trap. If you're a long trader, you just got margin called 5 times in 7 weeks. You sold at a loss or you got liquidated. But if you wanted to buy physical silver right now, you'd pay $95 or $105 per ounce, $20 over the official COMEX price of $87. So the paper market says silver is cheap, but you can't actually buy it at that price. The margin trap crushed paper longs, but it didn't increase physical supply. It reduced it. Here's the timeline side by side. In 1980, COMEX implemented Silver Rule 7 on January 7th, raised margins over 9 days, and crashed the market on March 27th. In 2026, CME raised margins on January 7th, hiked 5 times over 7 weeks, and crashed the market on January 30th. In 1980, the Hunts defaulted on a $100 million margin call, and silver fell 80%. In 2026, leveraged traders defaulted on billions in margin calls, and silver fell 40%. The playbook is identical. But here's the difference that could change everything. In 1980, the crash scared the world away from silver for 25 years. In 2026, the crash triggered massive physical buying. India's dealers are charging $110 per ounce. Tokyo is at $112. COMEX inventories are draining at record rates. And now, the U.S. government just announced a $12 billion strategic stockpile and a price floor policy. The paper market was crushed, but the physical market is tightening. Let me walk you through that trap. CME raises margins to force longs to sell. Paper price collapses. Mainstream media says the bubble popped. Retail panics and sells. But physical buyers, governments, industrial users, stackers step in at the bottom. Physical premiums spike, inventory drains. And then, when the margin requirements are lowered again or new buyers enter, the paper price has to catch up to the physical price. That's when the squeeze happens. And here's the kicker. In 1980, after Silver Thursday, silver stayed low for decades because there was no fundamental demand. In 2026, global silver demand is at an all-time high. The Silver Institute forecasts a 117 million ounce deficit for 2025 and a continued deficit through 2026. Solar panel production alone will consume 20% of global supply. Electronics, batteries, and defense add another 30%. If you remove investment demand entirely, industrial demand still exceeds mine supply. So what happens when the paper market collapses but the physical market is in deficit? The paper market becomes irrelevant. Buyers will pay whatever it takes to get physical. And when COMEX can't deliver, the exchange loses credibility. That's when the real squeeze begins. Not because of speculators, but because of supply and demand. Now, let's ask the obvious question. Why would the CME do this? If they knew raising margins 5 times would crash the market, why do it? Here's the theory. The CME and its members, commercial banks, market makers, are net short silver. When the price rallies from $35 to $121, their short positions lose billions. If they can trigger a crash, they cover those shorts at $75 instead of $121. That's a $46 per ounce gain on every short contract. But there's a second theory. The U.S. government is about to buy silver for a strategic stockpile. If you're going to buy 500 million ounces, would you rather pay $120 or $75? You'd engineer a crash, buy cheap, then announce the policy. And that's exactly what happened. January 30th, crash. February 2nd, Project Vault announced. February 4th, price floors confirmed. The timing is too perfect. Here's the final piece. In 1980, after the crash, silver never recovered because there was no follow-through demand. In 2026, the crash was followed by the largest government mineral stockpile announcement in U.S. history and a price floor policy. The crash wasn't the end, it was the setup, just like I said in the first video. So, here's where we are on February 5th, 2026. The CME raised margins 5 times in 7 weeks, using the exact same playbook as 1980's Silver Rule 7. The January 30th crash wiped out $10 trillion, but physical premiums are $20 to $30 over paper spot. COMEX inventories are down 22% and draining every week. Shanghai lowered margins while CME raised them, creating a paper-physical disconnect. And the U.S. government just announced they're buying silver with a price floor guarantee. The 1980 playbook crushed the Hunt brothers because they were leveraged speculators. But in 2026, the longs aren't speculators. They're governments, industrial users, and millions of retail stackers who know the difference between paper and physical. The margin trap worked to crash the paper price, but it might backfire spectacularly when the physical market realizes there's no silver left to deliver. I'm not telling you what to do, I'm showing you the pattern. If you think this is conspiracy theory, go read the CME notices, the Bloomberg articles, the Shanghai margin announcements. It's all sourced below. The question is, do you believe the crash was random, or do you believe it was engineered? And if it was engineered, who benefits when the paper price is $87 but physical is $105?